Do you want to go?
One of the things that, when we've taken evidence on universal credit, there were a lot of concerns about the sanctions regime, and whether people fully understood what they were being sanctioned for and what kind of warnings people were being given prior to a sanction being applied. So how do you ensure that your staff really deal with this properly?
Well, I think the first thing I say is that it's the world that we're trying to put in place for universal credit starts from the proposition that actually the current system isn't very clear to people. So if you actually want to have a decent sanction system, you do need to make sure you've got one that actually is sort of clear about the consequence for action. So quite a lot of the stuff to do with universal credit is trying to say, look, we're going to do this on the basis of first, second, and third sort of failures, and for each time we'll be very clear what we're doing. We won't have lots of variation, we won't have lots of different things in it. It'll be a straightforward thing, which, by the way, we will then write onto your claimant commitment. So at the moment, you can't find on your job seekers agreement exactly what it is you signed up to by way of sanctions, because there's so many ifs and buts and maybes. In the universal credit world, the set of sanctions is sufficiently straightforward. You can actually reference it in the claimant commitment, and people, when signing the claimant commitment, can know exactly where they stand. So there's a very deliberate simplification going on here to make sure that people can follow it.
Does simplification mean that there are then no ifs, buts and maybes? So if somebody comes along, hasn't brought their diary filled in, and can't produce it at the beginning of the interview, then is that sanctionable? So are they allowed to say any reason why they might not be able to do that?
So the we're still in the world of social security. People will still be able to, when confronted with a sanction, submit a rationale around what we call good reason to say, well, I couldn't do that because. So if, for example, to take a lower level sanction, they failed to attend a work-focused interview, they could put a good reason in to say, as it happens, my wife had to go to hospital or whatever it might be. And those are the sort of things which happen at the moment. They will continue as it is. In a sense, that part of the regime isn't changing. What we're trying to do is to say, look, if you want to understand what happens in the event that we don't agree your good reason, you have not turned up and there is no good reason for it, let me be clear, for low-level sanctions, particularly the sort of things where actually we expect you to do something, prepare a CV, attend a training course or whatever it is, for those low-level sanctions, the deal is simply going to be, look, we are going to sanction you until you have complied with what we've asked you to do. And in addition, we will add 7, 14, 28 days on top of that by way of a sanction. And so this is quite a new territory. It's what we've been calling sort of open-ended sanctions. So for the lower level sanctions, which are things where we would like you to have done something, we've asked you to do it, and there's no good reason why you should not have done, the sanction works on the basis actually you will complete this, and when you've completed it, the sanction will be removed. Now at the moment, we don't have that sort of arrangement. We are sanctioning the non-attendance or something. We're not trying to encourage people back in to actually then do the thing that we want. That's what the lower level sanctions are. The higher level sanctions are slightly different because they're in the nature of things which, if you think about it, sort of can't be remedied. So if I don't accept a job which I could reasonably have done, then we sanction you for that action, and there isn't sort of a remedy that if you turned it down and the job was gone. So the sanction principle which I'm trying to illustrate is that it's straightforward to comprehend what will happen to you, and I'm submitting that that's different and better than we have at the moment, where actually there's so many different variations. It's not straightforward to comprehend, but all of it remains subject to good reason.
If somebody is sanctioned for a long period, are they able to get any help? And could it not indeed be counterproductive? I mean, I'll give you an example of a constituent who has been sanctioned for 6 months because he wanted to go to one work programme provided where he'd been successful previously and was not the other, and was told he had to go to the one he was being told to go to, and has been sanctioned for his lost benefit for 6 months. How's he going to get any help at all in that period?
Okay, so it's really important to say that the staff in the job centres continue to make all the offers which currently exist, including when you're on sanction. So this is not a question of the sanction is there because within an active labour market with conditions, those conditions have not been met. It does not mean you can't then get help. And there's another important thing that we've introduced as well, which is that whatever sanction you've got, if you are 6 months off benefit, we will wipe the slate clean. So, if you find yourself in work or through the help of job centres getting into work because you're on a sanction, you can actually as I said, literally wipe the slate clean by being off benefit for 6 months.
Is that new? Forgive me for interrupting. Is that a new thing?
I thought it was new. If it's not, my apologies.
I know it could be. I'm not trying to catch you out. I hadn't heard that before.
I think I understood that this was a new departure. Again, to sort of reinforce the sense that we're trying to be clear about it. We'll check that. I don't think anybody knows.
Isn't there a risk that someone in that position is simply going to drift off?
Well, what would you like instead? The entire edifice of the job seeker agreement, which is why our labour market performance in this recession, which is a much deeper recession than many, has been much better than it would otherwise be, is because we have a conditional benefit. We make people do things, and that constant sort of being on people's case is actually having measurable improvements in labour market performance. So if people are not then going to meet those conditions, something has got to happen. And all that the government is doing now is trying to say, well, that something ought to be clear and straightforward and appropriate.
So you don't think there are people who are effectively disappearing from the system?
Well,
because you're saying that all these active prods and sanctions and so on are creating a good labour market performance, but there is some evidence that there are people who are dropping out of the system, if you don't accept that there are.
No, I didn't. So I didn't say that. But I'm not sure what you would expect the department to be doing. So
you must take into account the social consequences of some of the policy decisions that are made. If someone finds it too difficult to engage, then they might they might turn the crown.
Okay, so it's very important. It's very important to make sure then that the things that we ask them to engage with are reasonable. And so the good reason clause is there to try to make sure that actually we haven't, asked a ridiculous thing.
Yeah, but somebody who's got mild mental health problems, not severe enough to get anywhere near ESA, will be, in fact, a large proportion of those that you're sanctioning that will be because that's the fundamental reason, and a consequence of the sanction that they're not able to get out of because they can't fulfil what you ask them. It may seem reasonable to us, but it's too difficult for them, whether it's getting up in the morning or organising their time because of their illness, which is not severe enough, and the consequences of them that they're on the streets, they're homeless, and all of that. That must be of concern.
Well, it is a concern, but we're going to drift between people who are properly on JSA and people who, if they really cannot do active job search because of their condition, will not be in the conditionality.
We've got questions on the WCA, and they are, but we've got those questions coming. But that's the problem: is that to get through through the threshold of the WCA to get onto ESA, you have to be really very ill. Yeah. But there are lots of people who are not that ill, who are on JSA and are dependent on having an understanding personal advisor and things, and that's at the present that they sometimes do have an understanding personal advisor. But if the sanction regime is so rigid that those kinds of, which is what Sheila was asking, if those kind of personal observations of your personal advisor can't be taken into account, then storing up.
The example.
So let's be careful. What I've described is sort of what happens in the event that a particular claimant commitment has not been met. So we might both expect, therefore, if the individual you've just described is turning up, that what the job advisor does is to think of things actually that are within the scope of the individual to actually manage. There's nothing in it for the advisor to be sort of artificially setting a level of performance which clearly the individual can't.
Well, the example, can I just come back to the example I gave? Because I mean, you may say this is going to change suddenly under universal credit, but this particular person had been referred previously to one of the work providers, probably under a previous programme. There were 2 operating in the area. He had found that one, if you like, empathetic and he worked well with them, and the other he didn't. Because he was told you can't go to provider 1 whom you worked well with, you've got to go to provider 2. He didn't go to provider 2. He was sanctioned, and that's to say he's actually off benefit till January from about last July. Why was it not possible, if you're really trying to help somebody in this situation, to let him go to provider 1 rather than saying, we are dogmatically telling you you've got to go to provider 2? Now, this is somebody who I think probably does have an undiagnosed learning problem potentially, or mental health problem, doesn't want to self-diagnose it. I'm not a doctor, but it seemed to me unduly rigid. So this was, you've got to do this, and if you don't do it, that's it. That's not helping somebody to get back into work.
No, okay. Well, I understand that. I mean, the reason I suspect that lies behind this is we've gone to some trouble to make sure that there is, as you know, more than one work program provider in every contract package area, and we are deliberately assigning people randomly to them so that actually their performance isn't, you can actually measure the performance against each other and see where they are. Now, if it was indeed, a case in several thousand that went from provider A to provider B, then I could see exactly what what the position would be, and I'm sympathetic to your point. I mean, if on the other hand this becomes actually you can go to any provider you like, we will then start getting selection biases in the way in which you and I assess whether or not the providers are actually performing well. So one of the big problems with contractual structures is making sure you continue to have competition in the market even when you let the contract, and the way we've achieved that is to make sure there are multiple providers in every area with randomly allocated claimants. So that's what's lying behind it in general philosophy about the work programme. But you're right to say
you have just illustrated the thing that you said was wrong with your department. You give us the example of your member of staff who was able to, with a little tweaking, you were able, instead of having to send out a letter a month and then another month, to do it in 2 weeks. I've got a constituent who has got experience of one of the providers and doesn't want to go to that work programme provider, and he will face sanction. He hasn't yet, because of the experience of the same. So there are a number for very legitimate reasons, but you're saying, no, but we can't do it. We must be rigid because that's what.
With respect, I didn't say that. I was trying to explain what was probably lying behind the way the advisor treated. What I actually said to your colleague was that if actually these are known to be, isolated changes at the margins, it wouldn't make any difference to the statistics for the work programme, and actually that would be a perfectly legitimate thing to do. So I don't mind taking that away as a question. All I'm observing is if it becomes any person referred to the work programme can decide they'd rather go somewhere else, you will not be able, nor will I, to actually measure whether or not provider A and provider B are meeting the minimum standards.
But I don't think we're suggesting that.
Like all these things, like all these things, to a great extent, you're both right. I do understand that you need some of the boundaries, otherwise you're not going to have a level playing field, and the empirical evidence would be hopeless. But by the same token, I think my colleague and the chair is right, and it backs up to what the DWP says they are trying to do in Job Centre Plus. Yes, have those there rules, but have some level of occasional flexibility, which you will have an occasional flexibility, which won't throw the whole model out with the baby with the bathwater. So I think it's worth thinking about.
No, I'm happy to do it. So it may well be the case that it's actually relatively straightforward because the numbers of people that actually ask to switch providers is so infinitesimally small that actually we can just give people some carte blanche. So I'm very happy to take that one away as an example, because that is exactly, you're absolutely right. I do think we're both right. I'm happy to look at it.
Can I just push you a wee bit more on the point that Sheila was making, is the numbers of people who are disappearing out of the system. In other words, the sanctions regime is such. Now, it might be that that's what the government's intention is. If they're not going to do as they say,